My name is Alex Rivera, and I'm 29 years old. What happened when my former landlord opened the certified mail envelope that arrived at his office last Tuesday is something that completely transformed his understanding of power, consequences, and which one of us actually had the legal authority to ruin the other's life. Picture this: Frank Morrison, the man who had laughed in my face 6 weeks earlier while serving me an eviction notice for no valid reason, sitting behind his desk confidently sorting through mail, only to freeze in horror when he saw my signature on documents that would cost him everything he'd spent 15 years building as a property owner. You see, that letter wasn't just correspondence, it was notification that his former tenant, the one he'd dismissed as powerless and insignificant, had just purchased the mortgage on his entire rental property portfolio. The same man who had mocked me as just another broke renter who couldn't fight back was now reading official documentation that I owned the debt on 12 properties worth $3.2 million, giving me the legal right to foreclose on everything he'd worked to acquire. Before we dive into this story, I need to know, where in the world are you watching this unfold? Drop your country and what time it is there right now in the comments. I'm curious if you're starting your morning with this story or winding down your evening with some sweet revenge. And hey, if you've ever dealt with a power-hungry landlord, give this video a thumbs up so I know you're ready for some justice. Also, quick question before we start: have you ever been in a situation where someone completely underestimated what you were capable of? Because this story is all about hidden power meeting abuse of authority, and I have a feeling many of you will relate to what happened next. Let me take you back to that humiliating morning in September when Frank Morrison knocked on my apartment door at 7 a.m., holding an eviction notice and wearing the smug expression of someone who enjoyed wielding power over people he viewed as beneath him. I had been renting the one-bedroom apartment at 847 Maple Street for 14 months, paying $1,400 monthly rent on time, maintaining the property in excellent condition, and causing zero problems for other tenants or neighbors. My lease had another 10 months remaining, and I had never received a single complaint or violation notice. But Frank had decided he wanted me gone, not for any legitimate reason, but because he'd found a tenant willing to pay $1,800 for the same unit, a $400 monthly increase that would net him an extra $4,800 annually. "Alex Rivera," he said when I opened the door, "I'm serving you with official notice to vacate the premises." Vacate? Frank, what are you talking about? My lease doesn't expire until next July. Read the notice, he said, thrusting the papers toward me with obvious satisfaction. You have 30 days to move out. I scanned the eviction notice, looking for the legal justification that would allow him to break a valid lease agreement. What I found was a fabricated claim that I had been disturbing other tenants with excessive noise and had violated lease terms regarding property maintenance. Frank, this is completely false. I've never received a noise complaint, and my apartment is spotless. You can inspect it right now if you want. The notice has been filed with the court. You can contest it if you want to waste money on lawyers, but the judge will side with the property owner. They always do. This is illegal. You can't evict someone without cause when they have a valid lease. Frank's response was what made this encounter truly memorable. He actually laughed in my face. Alex, let me explain something to you about how the real world works. I own 12 rental properties in this city. I have expensive lawyers, political connections, and relationships with judges who hear these cases. You're just another renter who thinks they have rights. I do have rights. The lease is a legal contract. Your rights are whatever I say they are. You can spend thousands fighting this eviction and still lose, or you can move out quietly and avoid having an eviction on your record that will make it impossible to rent anywhere decent in the future. You're basically extorting me to abandon my legal rights. I'm giving you a reality check. You have no leverage here. You're a tenant, I'm a property owner. The system protects property owners, not renters who can't afford to fight back. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Frank explaining why my legal rights were meaningless against his resources and influence, why fighting the eviction would be financial suicide, and why I should accept his decision gracefully instead of making things difficult for both of us. "Look, Alex, I don't have anything personal against you. You've been a decent tenant. But business is business, and I can get more money from someone else. That's just capitalism. So you're illegally evicting me to increase your profit margin. I'm using the legal system exactly as it's designed to be used, to protect property owners from tenants who don't understand their place in the relationship." Frank left that morning confident that he had successfully intimidated me into compliance, certain that his combination of legal threats and financial pressure would force me to move out without challenging his fraudulent eviction notice. What Frank didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to discover during our 14 months as landlord and tenant, was that his assumptions about my financial situation and legal resources were catastrophically wrong. I wasn't just another broke renter who couldn't afford to fight back. I was a software engineer who had been living modestly while building substantial savings and investments, including a portfolio worth $1.8 million that generated enough passive income to support my lifestyle without touching my salary. More importantly, I had been looking for real estate investment opportunities, particularly distressed properties or debt purchases that could provide both financial returns and personal satisfaction. Frank's treatment of me had just provided both the motivation and the target for exactly that kind of investment. If you've ever been threatened or intimidated by someone who assumed you didn't have the resources to fight back, pause the video right now and type "hidden power" in the comments. Seriously, I want to see how many of you have been underestimated by people in positions of authority. While you're typing, let me know, what's the worst experience you've had with a landlord or boss who thought they could push you around? And for those of you who are new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because you're about to see exactly how dangerous it can be to abuse people whose capabilities you've never bothered to understand. What comes next will show you the most satisfying financial revenge I've ever witnessed, and trust me, you don't want to miss how this plays out. The 30 days Frank had given me to vacate turned into 30 days of the most focused research and strategic planning I'd ever undertaken. Instead of looking for a new apartment or preparing to move, I was investigating Frank Morrison's entire business operation and identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with sufficient resources and motivation. What I discovered was that Frank's property empire was built on a foundation of over-leveraged debt that made him extraordinarily vulnerable to financial pressure. His 12 rental properties were financed through a complex web of mortgages, second mortgages, and private loans that required consistent rental income to service. More importantly, I learned that Frank's aggressive eviction tactics weren't unique to my situation. He had a pattern of removing tenants to increase rents, using fraudulent complaints and legal intimidation to force people out of their homes when their leases prevented legitimate rent increases. Through public records research, I found that Frank had filed 43 eviction notices over the past 3 years, with most cases being settled out of court when tenants agreed to leave rather than face expensive legal battles they assumed they would lose. But Frank had made a critical error in his risk assessment. He had targeted someone who could not only afford to fight back legally but had the resources to acquire leverage that would make legal fighting unnecessary. My investigation revealed that Frank's mortgage portfolio was held by 3 different banks, with total outstanding debt of approximately $2.1 million across all 12 properties. The mortgages were current but not well secured, meaning the banks would be receptive to offers from investors willing to purchase the debt at a discount. More interestingly, I discovered that Frank had recently missed 2 mortgage payments on his newest acquisition, a 4-unit building he'd purchased 6 months earlier with an aggressive financing package that was straining his cash flow. That missed payment history made his entire mortgage portfolio what debt investors call distressed debt, loans that banks are motivated to sell rather than risk foreclosure proceedings that could result in significant losses. I contacted my investment advisor and explained that I wanted to purchase distressed real estate debt as both a financial investment and a personal project. Within 2 weeks, we had identified Frank's mortgage holders and begun negotiating to acquire his loans at substantial discounts. The process was surprisingly straightforward. Banks prefer selling distressed mortgages to qualified investors rather than managing foreclosure proceedings, especially when the purchaser offers immediate payment and assumes all collection responsibilities. By the end of my 30-day eviction period, I had successfully purchased $2.1 million worth of mortgage debt for $1.6 million, giving me legal ownership of the loans on all 12 of Frank's rental properties, including the building where he was trying to evict me. But I wanted Frank to understand what had happened gradually, the same way I'd been forced to understand the reality of his power over my housing situation. Instead of immediately notifying him that I now controlled his mortgage debt, I hired a property management attorney to handle all communications and began the process of demanding full compliance with every technical requirement of his loan agreements. The first communication Frank received was a letter from my attorney's office informing him that his mortgage debt had been purchased by a private investor and that all future payments should be sent to a new address. The letter was formal and professional, giving no indication of who the new debt holder was. The second communication came 2 weeks later, when Frank received notice that several of his properties were being inspected for code violations and regulatory compliance issues that could affect the mortgage agreements. The third communication was a demand letter requiring Frank to provide complete financial records for all rental properties, including tenant agreements, maintenance records, and documentation of all eviction proceedings over the past 3 years. By this point, Frank was beginning to panic. His calls to the attorney's office were met with professional courtesy but no information about the identity of his new mortgage holder or their intentions regarding his debt obligations. But Frank's real terror began when he received the certified letter that would reveal exactly who now controlled his financial future. The letter was delivered on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after he'd laughed in my face while serving me an eviction notice. I know the timing because I was watching from across the street as the postal worker handed Frank the certified envelope that would change everything about our relationship dynamic. The envelope contained a single sheet of letterhead from my investment company, with a message that was brief and devastating. Mr. Morrison, this letter serves as official notification that Rivera Holdings LLC has acquired all mortgage debt associated with your rental property portfolio, totaling $2.1 million across 12 properties. As the new debt holder, we are exercising our right to demand full compliance with all loan terms and conditions. Any violations of mortgage agreements, including but not limited to fraudulent rental practices or abuse of tenant rights, may result in immediate foreclosure proceedings. Please contact our office within 48 hours to discuss your debt obligations and our expectations for property management standards. Sincerely, Alex Rivera, Managing Director, Rivera Holdings LLC. I watched from my car as Frank read the letter, saw his face go pale, watched him read it again as the reality of his situation began to sink in. Then I heard him start screaming. The screaming was audible even from across the street, a combination of rage, terror, and disbelief as Frank processed that his former tenant, the one he'd dismissed as powerless, now owned the debt on everything he'd spent 15 years building as a property investor. Hold up, I need to pause here because this moment was insane. If you're enjoying this revenge story, smash that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what country are you watching from and have you ever seen someone's arrogance come back to bite them this hard? I'm genuinely curious how many of you have witnessed karma in action like this. My phone rang within 10 minutes. Alex, this is impossible. Where did you get the money to buy my mortgages? Hello, Frank. I got the money the same place I've been getting money for 14 months, from investments and income you never bothered to understand because you assumed I was just another broke renter. But $2 million, how could you have that kind of money? The same way you have 12 rental properties, Frank. Through careful financial planning and strategic investments. The difference is that I didn't need to abuse tenants to build wealth. What do you want from me? I want you to understand something about how the real world actually works. You told me that my rights were whatever you said they were, that the system protects property owners, and that I had no leverage because I was just a tenant. But now I'm your mortgage holder, which means your property ownership exists only as long as I allow it to. The silence that followed was unlike any quiet I'd ever heard from Frank Morrison. For the first time in our relationship, he was the one without power, the one who needed to be careful about his words and actions. Alex, can we work something out? Maybe we can negotiate some kind of arrangement. We can definitely work something out. Here are my terms: you will withdraw the fraudulent eviction notice against me immediately. You will pay my attorney fees for fighting your illegal eviction attempt. You will refund the security deposit and last month's rent that you've been holding illegally. And you will provide written acknowledgement that your eviction was fraudulent and motivated by greed rather than legitimate tenant violations. And if I agree to those terms? Then you can continue making mortgage payments to me instead of to the banks, and I won't pursue foreclosure proceedings that would cost you everything you've worked to build. And if I don't agree? Then you'll discover what it feels like to be on the receiving end of someone who has more financial resources and legal leverage than you do. Frank agreed to my terms within 24 hours. The fraudulent eviction notice was withdrawn, my attorney fees were paid, and I received both a written apology and acknowledgement that his eviction attempt had been legally baseless. But more importantly, Frank's entire approach to tenant relations changed once he understood that abusing renters could have consequences he'd never anticipated. The pattern of fraudulent evictions stopped, and his remaining tenants began reporting that their landlord had suddenly become respectful and professional in all interactions. 6 months later, I sold Frank's mortgage debt back to a traditional bank at a profit, having made my point about the dangers of abusing people whose resources and capabilities you've never bothered to understand. The landlord who had laughed while illegally evicting me learned that power dynamics can shift very quickly when someone has the resources to purchase your leverage and use it against you. Sometimes the most effective response to abuse isn't fighting within someone else's system, it's having enough resources to become the system they have to answer to. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply using someone's own tactics against them when you have the financial capability to flip the power dynamic completely. Before we wrap up, I'm genuinely curious about your experiences. Drop a comment letting me know what time zone you're in and whether you've ever had to deal with someone who abused their power over you. Did you find a way to fight back, or are you still dealing with the situation? And hey, if this story inspired you or gave you some hope that bullies don't always win, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know who might be dealing with their own Frank Morrison and could use some encouragement that power dynamics can change. What abuse of power have you experienced from people who assumed you couldn't fight back? What hidden resources do you have that others have underestimated? Thank you for listening to my story. Seriously, thank you for taking the time to watch this, whether you're grabbing your morning coffee in New York or winding down for the night in Sydney. If you've ever been dismissed as powerless by someone who didn't understand your actual capabilities, you're not alone, and I hope this story reminded you that people often reveal their own weaknesses when they try to exploit what they think is yours. Drop hidden leverage in the comments if you believe that people who abuse their power often underestimate the resources of those they're targeting. And while you're commenting, tell me what country you're watching from. I love seeing how global our community is. Make sure to subscribe and absolutely smash that notification bell because we post stories like this every week about power dynamics, financial revenge, and those incredible moments when people who thought they were untouchable discover they picked the wrong person to mess with. Quick question before you go: should people with financial resources use them to fight back against abuse like I did? Or do you think it's better to pursue justice through traditional legal channels? I'm genuinely interested in your thoughts, so let me know in the comments what you would have done in my situation. And remember, your power isn't always visible to people who are trying to abuse you, but when you have the resources to flip the situation completely, it can teach lessons that benefit everyone who comes after you. Sometimes the best way to help future victims is to make sure the current bully learns there are consequences for their actions.